Good afternoon, everyone. We are absolutely thrilled that so many of you decided to spend some time this afternoon with us. And it's wonderful actually to see both retirees and some of our newest staff members here at the same time. So welcome to everyone. A few months ago, I should say, I had the great honor of co-hosting an event with University Advancement to celebrate the third volume in the official history of McMaster. This volume, written by Dr. Jim Greenlee, is aptly titled A Chance for Greatness and covers 30 pivotal years in our university's history, 1957 to 1987. And I read the book when it first came out, and I was thoroughly mesmerized by it. Reading it gave me a much better understanding of McMaster's story, the story of our incredible transformation from a very small Baptist-led liberal arts-focused institution to a world-class research university. And I was intrigued by Jim's description of the nuclear reactor, the creation of the medical school, and student protests over food services on campus. But I was also quite struck by how often the library and our collections were mentioned. And it occurred to me then how interesting it would be to invite Jim to come and speak to both library staff and library retirees. And fortunately for us, Jim actually agreed, and here we are today. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you the gentleman and scholar that many would describe as McMaster's historian, Dr. Jim Greenlee. Jim was born in Hamilton, Ontario. He accomplished the trifecta. He graduated with a BA, an MA, and a PhD from McMaster University. Dr. Greenlee taught here at Mac, then at the University of Windsor, before heading east to Corner Brook, Newfoundland, where he took up teaching assignment at Grenfell College. So for over 30 years, Jim taught medieval, European, British, Irish, and imperial history. He wrote several books and journal articles, including a very well-regarded biography of Sir Robert Falconer. He officially retired from Memorial University in August of 2007, but was coaxed out of retirement with great enthusiasm, first by John Weaver and then by Peter George, to take up the work on the third volume of the history of McMaster. And I understand from speaking to Rick Stapleton that Jim was pretty much camped out in research collections for weeks at a time, and he and the staff, whom he refers to as Sherpas in the acknowledgement of his book, developed a very great fondness for each other. He collected over 10,000 pages of handwritten notes sitting in research collections. In 2011, it was reported that Jim returns to Hamilton for 4 months each summer and has not missed a season of Graduate Student Association baseball since 1968. I give you Dr. Jim Greenlee.
Thank you, Vivian. Can everybody hear me properly? I have to tune it down. I'm wearing a lapel mic here, and I'm told not to use my lecture voice. My fellow bibliophiles. That's the first time I've heard that spoken aloud, and it's creepily Nixonian, My fellow bibliophiles. I wish I'd deleted it, but there it is. First, let me say how delighted, and I mean this sincerely, everybody says it, but I mean it, how delighted I am to be with you today. Delighted to offer my thanks in person to you and belatedly to those who came before you at Mills Library. Indeed, I feel deeply indebted to this institution and those who made it and make it run. Historians, after all, are library-dependent folk, and I'm no exception. Thus, it has mattered, truly mattered, that from my first hours as a sniveling, bewildered undergraduate, through my decades as a visiting prof, to my recent stint as university historian, I've encountered absolutely nothing but kindness, courtesy, enthusiasm, and willing assistance in this institution, whether I was dealing with a senior learned archivist or the most recent neophyte student at the circulation desk. Scholarship, as many of you know, Andy, can be a very lonely profession. Accordingly, the spirit of co-engagement that's on offer here at Mills is as important to vagabond academics such as I as any materials you might have on offer, and I thank you for the use of them, for the help with them, as one who's benefited from both material and emotional help for close to 50 years. That said, I come here today not just to offer thanks, but to say a few words about the, how should we say, reimagining of McMaster after secularization in 1957, and about the library's place in that transformation, because it had a very important place. But in order to get it, in order to understand the molding of the library during that period, it has to be seen within the broader context, a broader context as an integral and wholly typical part of a clearly articulated, enduringly consistent scheme of university-wide development at McMaster. More briefly and coherently put than thus far rambled, between 1957 and 1987, the library flowered, but not simply in terms of sheer space and holdings. Rather, it blossomed designedly, a quintessential expression of what I've dubbed in this volume, the Thodian paradigm. Allow me to elaborate. And here it's necessary first to illustrate that the interpretation I offer in the book rests upon a very solid and broad foundation. That foundation includes source material such as the endless shelves groaning under the weight of presidential papers, long runs of sundry campus publications, the Silhouette, the Old McMaster News, Contact, Courier, newsletters of every description from every conceivable group, from the serious to the extremely scurrilous and scandalous. Then there are the cavernous vaults of the University Secretariat, the brimming archive of the health sciences, voluminous minutes of Senate, lovely, just lovely stuff to go through. And then the records of various faculties and departments, as well as a few, but sadly only a few, sets of personal papers. Not as many as I'd expected to find. Added to these, one thing that the project itself added to these was a series of recent interviews with veterans of the era. The tapes and transcripts of those are now available at Mills, and probably, at least in my mind, constitute maybe even a greater contribution to an understanding of that age than the book itself, because they offer the often extremely frank voice of the period as intoned by some of the age's since departed luminaries, people such as John Evans, Fraser Mustard, Dave Sackett, and Art Borns, just to name a few. And they're all right here to go and listen to or read. They are, in other words, treasures beyond price. In sum, the foundation for the interpretation for the book rests on a rich vein of evidentiary ore. And so what? Right? Mining it was time-consuming, but as anybody here who's written anything knows, as Ken would know for sure, interpreting it, refining it down to its essence proved quite difficult, but only at the micro level, at the level of detail. At the macro level, at the level of grand interpretation, it was easy. It was crystal clear. Indeed, the deeper I and my team of research associates dug, the clearer it became, the more obvious a governing theme emerged. That strikingly dominant note was McMaster's consistent pursuit of an unmistakably clear sense of core purpose, to which all else, for good or ill, and sometimes ill, but to which all else was deliberately subordinated. This during the period 1957 to 87. Defining, what was that dominant note? Well, defining a new identity for McMaster was the work of many hands, obviously. Couldn't help but be. But the lead author was indisputably Henry G. Harry Thode. Harry was a galvanizing force on campus from the moment he got here in 1939 and grew ever more so as time went by, and emerged as the university's meteoric president throughout the booming 60s, when the booming was good. Moreover, he came to power. He's a lucky guy. He came to power at a unique moment in history, a moment when the public and all levels of government, if you can imagine this, all levels of government were eager to invest in higher education, and the only questions being asked were, what do you want to do, and how much, pretty please, can we throw your way to help you do it? Okay. Well, not surprisingly, different institutions answered in different ways. They had different visions of their future and started to shape them in that direction, even though, as we know, they've tended to converge towards the middle as time goes on. But in the beginning, not to steal a well-used phrase, Waterloo said, give us applied engineering and science, applied science. York answered, as did Carleton, we'll have the liberal arts, if you please. Okay. U of T in all its grandeur, echoed from on high, send us all of the above and everything else. Thode's response had been long in the making, and he knew the moment when he saw it. So his answer was unhesitating and precise, and decisive for McMaster. McMaster, he declared, should develop as a research, graduate-intensive university, one of medium physical size, but a university striving for excellence in a number of carefully selected major fields of endeavor. Earnestly desiring to compete with the biggest and the best, Harry was always a competitive person. He argued that Mac could do this only by concentrating shared resources on very specific, high-profile targets of established strength, or taking a chance sometimes on launching truly unique undertakings. And all this was to be done on a purpose-built campus, where like stood handily by like in order to encourage cooperation and interdisciplinary effort where it was merited, not interdisciplinary work for its own sake, but to aid these larger goals. Such, in broad outline, was the nature of what I've dubbed in the book the Thodian paradigm, which one could distill down to a simple statement, that it involved the notion of pursuing selective excellence within a deliberately differentiated Ontario system of higher education. What did Harry mean by differentiated? Well, to him, the Ontario system of higher education had to be one in which the universities ought not to replicate, but that's not the word. Let's say complement one another. They should, in other words, be different. It should be a system that worked like a network, a matrix. At a minimum, at a rock bottom minimum, he argued, there should be two tiers with a number of, and these are his words, junior undergraduate colleges feeding a few elite graduate research intensive full universities, and I leave you to figure out where he thought Mac should rest in this tier system. Well, his strategy of development was well suited to the ebullient 60s, no question about it, when money was rolling downhill, right? But it came under intense pressure from the public and government in the lean 70s and the very hungry 80s, when even a graduate degree was no passport to guaranteed self-selected employment. At this juncture, Queen's Park began demanding more scholar for the dollar, as the anthem of the hour ran, which generally boiled down to more BAs. Okay? While simultaneously it was promoting applied research over the kind of pure research that Harry and his friends had in mind. But by 1972, when Thode retired, the seed he had planted had taken such deep root that it could not be dislodged, or at least not easily. Thus, for good or ill, Harry's successors, Art Borns and Alvin Lee, stayed the course and adapted the quest for selective excellence and differentiation to a more straightened hour, external pressures notwithstanding. And there are some very gutsy statements by Borns particularly and Lee later, saying to the government, this is what we're going to do. We know you don't like it, but this is what we're about. The clearest evidence of this willingness to stay the course can be found in the so-called Plan for McMaster, which came out in 1978 and enshrined Thodian precepts about selective excellence in a document whose echo can still be heard on this campus today, to my outsider's ear, remembering I come from Memorial University over the last 35 years. But you can also find it in the so-called McTwo initiative. McTwo is an acronym for McGill, Queens, Toronto, Western, and Waterloo. And it represented an effort, an initiative, on the part of Alvin Lee and his peers to differentiate those universities from all others for funding purposes, because they were the ones who were producing big-time research and a lot of graduate students. That didn't work either, but it was worth a try. In any event, by 1987, when I withdraw from the scene, among the Thodian mentality's monuments stood the McMaster nuclear reactor and tandem accelerator, a, how shall we put it, heretical medical school, a uniquely scientific engineering school, a pioneering religious studies program, the arts and science degree, and a wide variety of interdisciplinary research units, such as the Institute for Materials Research, which is still chugging along today. Taken as a whole, these sundry initiatives had been designed to differentiate McMaster and enable the university to punch well above its weight in the major leagues. So it's within that context, this general context, that the systematic cultivation of the library has to be understood. It has to be understood as a center of research excellence in the Thodian scheme of things. In fact, it was the key, and perceived to be the key, to the rearmament of arts. Which brings me to the lamentable title of this talk, The Will to Flower, and I apologize for that. It's rather cheesy, I know, and a too cute effort to juxtapose a reference to both Nietzsche and one of this university's more celebrated librarians. It's a bit of a stretch, I'll admit that, but as I hope to show, it's only a bit of a stretch. As the 60s dawned, McMaster's library holdings were well up to the task of supporting Thode's summons to doctoral studies and hardcore research in science. Thus, specialized books and periodicals had been assiduously collected since the late 40s, when graduate work began in earnest at Hamilton College, now Hamilton Hall. Much of that material was scattered across campus, but the bulk was housed on the top floor of the Burke Sciences building. The accommodations might have sucked, but the collection was fast maturing by 1960 as one of the finest in Canada. The picture, however, was far less rosy in arts departments. Arts departments that were under growing pressure from Gilmore Hall to follow their scientific confreres down the road of graduate research intensive development. Indeed, physicist Harry Duckworth was clearly taken aback. I remember the memo very, very crisply in my mind. He was clearly taken aback in 1962 when, as Dean of Graduate Studies, he found very respected leaders in the arts department, notably people such as Edward Togo Salmon, Herbert William Macready, and Roy McKean Wiles, decidedly hesitant to take up the challenge to undertake doctoral programs. Duckworth, however, was wise enough to understand that these people were not woolly-headed, retrograde dons content to slumber in some kind of comfortable academic stasis until they drew their meager pensions. On the contrary, each of these people was an active, noted scholar in his field. Accordingly, Duckworth, the dean, paused for a moment. He sought their counsel, and more importantly, he listened to it. Salmon and Company outlined several perfectly sound reasons, too many to go into right now, but perfectly sound reasons for not leaping quickly aboard the Thodian Express. Among these, perhaps the most compelling was the current state of Mills Library, which University librarian Margaret Mickleham described in 1961, and to use her words, barely adequate for undergraduate instruction. The essential foundation, she said, for serious on-campus research and graduate study simply is not there. Driving this point home to Harry, she wrote, and I quote, "Our library growth has not kept pace with the academic development of other parts of this university." And you can hear a tone of sort of i.e. science and engineering. Reinforcing the message, Salmon, Wiles, and others went on to advise Duckworth and Thode that the current collection of about 150,000 volumes just wouldn't cut it. It would have to rise to at least 500,000, and quickly, within the next few years, if PhD programs at McMaster were to be taken seriously by candidates and also by outside assessors. To that end, they counseled that bolstering the library, and wouldn't librarians love to hear this today, they counseled that the library would have to take precedence over all other university priorities, including faculty appointments. Yeah. And that's right in the documents. Unspoken here was a concern, and it was shared by many people, not all, but many in arts, that the new president, Harry Thode, had little real interest in matters that were unrelated to science. At least a few of them thought Harry to be the Philistine incarnate. To a point, this was even fair. According to his biographers, Thode, while he devoured technical journals wholesale and voraciously, showed no great, how should we say, passion, no burning fondness for what others might call literature. Okay. Still, Harry was a wise president, and he recognized good advice when he heard it. Therefore, it was of the utmost importance that his key advisors, although almost all of them were scientists, and high flyers at that, all of them were people of broad cultivation. People such as Art Borns, Mel Preston, and others. They were Thode's bridge to the Togo Salmons, to the Micklehams, to the Roy McKean Wiles of this world, as was E. Carey Fox, the chancellor of university at the time. To cut a long story short and mangle it by oversimplifying it, which I love to do because I'm running out of time, by 1962, Gilmore Hall stood foursquare behind the idea of shifting resources towards arts in order to bring them into line with the graduate research-intensive model that had long animated science. Now, no department in arts was forced down that road, but all understood that if they didn't take the journey, they were stalled forever. Okay? They were left looking for handouts. For those who took up the challenge, the most decisive signal, the signal that the PhD target could be met, was the promise from Gilmore Hall that the library resources would be vastly and rapidly expanded. Banking on this, history took the doctoral plunge in 1962, followed by English in 64, religious studies in 65, and others in train. Crucially, the university, does this sound familiar or strange? Crucially, the university kept its promise. It kept its side of the bargain. In 1964, a substantial extension, physical extension to Mills was opened. Meanwhile, there was solid evidence of a clear commitment to fill it with quality holdings as rapidly as possible. Indeed, you'd love this one too, the acquisitions budget was tripled that same year, with the promise to do so again for several years to come. Well, materials flooded in. And Mickleham noted that those materials were accumulating faster than they could be cataloged. This was the card catalog day, okay? And as she edged towards retirement, she nonetheless gloried in, and I quote her, "the kind of problems which any library is glad to face, for they speak of challenge rather than frustration, and of movement rather than stagnation." Moreover, that same feeling of movement was enlivening many of her contemporaries in arts, since at last there was money not only for general acquisition, but also for high-grade, targeted, special collection. Now, there are several examples I could draw on here, but typical of this was the generous support given to Roy Wiles' project to build a world-class repository focusing on 18th century literature, particularly English literature. Stretching every dollar as far as it would go, Dr. William Cameron displayed astute bibliographic entrepreneurship, working with booksellers in Ithaca and Philadelphia, who went around and they tracked down rare items, gathered them together, and sold them in bulk at discount to Mac, which was enhancing the library on the cheap, but enhancing it nonetheless. By 1966, Wiles could tell Thode that the library now held the best research collection of that particular kind in Canada. He went further to envisage the birth of a sweeping interdisciplinary 18th century studies program that would be, he said, no, that's wrong, that would, he said, enhance McMaster's reputation and give it an identity in arts on an international scene in much the same way as the nuclear reactor had done in science. Here, in short, was Wiles' Thodian dream for arts, embracing a seemingly boundless cross-fertilization across many disciplines. Now, as we know, this didn't quite pan out in the way designed, but the mere idea speaks volumes of the degree to which Thode's model was influencing both the arts departments and library development, was steering it. Well, that development truly flowered, however, with the coming of Will Reedy in 1965. Described by one contemporary as, and I quote, a bibliophilic buccaneer, Reedy was a Thodian to the manner born. From his first hours in office, he was determined, absolutely determined, to catapult McMaster into the vanguard of Canadian research libraries. A nice, solid graduate collection wasn't good enough for Reedy. To this gnome-like swashbuckler, goals mattered. It was the goal that matters. Methods, well, they could be improvised. In Reedy, Harry recognized a bibliophile who happened to be a kindred spirit and was ready to back him to the hilt. Proof of this came in 1967. In that year, iconic philosopher, icon of evil, icon of wisdom, depends on your point of view, but iconic philosopher Bertrand Russell, third Earl of his line, was desperate for cash. Hard to imagine, but that family had long since run out of money. He was eager to indict the United States of America for war crimes in Vietnam. He and some like-minded colleagues were on the hunt for funds with which to tackle dollar-laden Uncle Sam in the media battle for world opinion. In deadly earnest and as a symbol of his earnestness, Russell put up his last great asset, his personal papers, for auction. Now, getting early wind of this, Reedy's reaction was probably predictable. He presented Thode with a bold plan to scoop up this sure-to-be-priceless collection, around which he and Harry imagined a great confederation of arts departments could really cash in. The cost was going to be steep, he informed the president, but the payoff was certain to be huge. This is Harry's language. In one step, said Reedy, McMaster could move to center stage as a magnet for scholars across the globe. With bidders aplenty lurking about, ready to pounce, Thode didn't so much as blink. Reedy got the go-ahead and the race was on. The international contest to secure the papers was too complex to be charted here. Suffice it to say that Reedy succeeded, but not without some friction on the home front. Indeed, several members of the Board of Governors put up stiff opposition to laying out a large sum to procure, maybe that's not the best word to use here, to procure the letters of an avowedly atheistic pacifist who extolled the virtues of free love. That was some Baptist hangover at this stage. The voice of Thode, however, thundering from on high, proved to be decisive. Harry spent some of his own very considerable political capital and enthusiastically backed William Reedy, arguing that the Russell papers would do for the arts what the reactor had been to science, a springboard into the major leagues of competitive cooperative research. For a variety of reasons, too complex again to enunciate here, enthusiasm to participate in plumbing this resource was less on campus than had been anticipated. Still, the acquisition in itself was an undoubted coup. It made front page news, that was always good, in the Thodian lexicon. It also led to the eventual founding of the Russell Project and has drawn scores of visitors annually from around the world. Moreover, and this is just as important, it gave credibility to Reedy in his drive to burnish the university's research and special collections, an endeavor that met with sterling results, no pun intended. Over the next decade, Mills became home to the papers of Irish playwright Samuel Beckett and those of a cadre of Canadian authors such as Pierre Berton, Margaret Atwood, Farley Mowat, on and on and on. In addition, McMaster's emergence as a nodal point for research into the Canadian literary inheritance was strengthened by the acquisition of massive records from publishing houses such as Macmillan Canada and McClellan and Stewart, as you all know. The payoff was recognition. And recognition came in 1976 when Mills was named a member of the prestigious Association of Research Libraries. This exclusive club included centers of excellence such as Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Columbia south of the border, with McMaster one of only 5 in our Dominion. While Reedy and his able successor Graham Hill played cardinal roles in this process, they could have made little progress without active support from Gilmore Hall. In that regard, the most ardent champion of the library over the long haul, the very long haul, was undoubtedly Alvin A. Lee, to whom the library owes a great debt. As the first vice president academic, or provost as he's now called, or she is now called, he, David Wilkinson, but as the first VP academic in 1974, and throughout his later presidency, Lee cultivated Mills' garden assiduously. Thus, he made a point of sitting down with first Reedy and then Hill every year to hammer out and refine cogent library presentations for the board, long in advance of the actual budgetary process. Together, these bibliophiles ensured that the library requests, if they weren't always fully granted, were at least sufficiently met until the truly frightening 80s came along and the bottom fell out of everything. But by that time, the McMaster library system had made enormous strides since the time Michelham had described it as barely adequate for undergraduate instruction. From the 200,000 volumes in 1965, it rose to hold well over 1 million by Reedy's retirement in 1978, and kept on growing in size, but also more importantly, in targeted quality, and to a degree, even in hard times. Did time permit, and had I the energy, which I do not, I could go on to discuss the development of what became the Thode Library, which opened in 1978, was originally slated to sit on the mall, was denounced as visual pollution by 3,500 students in a petition, as well as many faculty, and then moved to the west side of campus. I could also talk a little bit about the sister library in health sciences. Yet, were I to do so, the story would remain the same. Okay? Thus, by 1987, the library system as a whole stood like the McMaster Nuclear Reactor or the Institute for Materials Research as a monument to the Thodian quest for selective excellence and testimony to the cheesy will to flower. Colleagues, friends, for your endurance, for your patience, and for every effort keeping your eyes open, my thanks.